Chapter 5. First day of June. Earliest sunrise this month. Second. Whitsunday. Worked on garden which is entirely up. Was real ho boy. Here you might wonder, for knowing how religious the early American was, and remembering how even stagecoaches stopped running on the Sabbath, doesn't it seem odd that Noah worked on the garden during Sunday? The answer is likely that he worked after sundown, for at that time the Sabbath began on Saturday at sundown and ended on Sunday at sundown. In fact, the old Saturday night bath started from the adage about cleanliness being akin to godliness, so we might assume that Noah worked in the garden as Sunday night drew on. It is interesting to note here how farmers used to work in what we now call darkness. Many present-day scientists insist that the early countrymen had extraordinary eyesight, keener than the average eyesight of today. Farmers frequently did their haying at night, using the moon or the stars for illumination and taking advantage of the coolness of summer night. At any rate, it seems remarkable that so much work did get done with so few mechanical conveniences and without the use of outdoor lanterns. Many farms had no lanterns, and those that did use them more for carrying a flame from place to place than for actual illumination. The most common farm lantern was the metal one, punched with many holes. Glass lanterns are most rare. The drawing also shows a simple tin measuring can with holes punched through it for carrying a candle. Farm lanterns were made at home. Tin dipper with holes punched through for light. Candle inside. Iron lantern with slits and holes punched through it. Wood lantern with glass or horn windows sliding into slits in wood. A hoe boy, balanced on the end of the table by a weight. Below the lantern drawings, you may see the author's explanation of what Noah might have meant when he wrote in his diary, was real ho boy. A popular toy of the early 1800s was a balancing figure that sat on the end of a table and moved up and down for a great while. First it was a man riding a horse, but then there was a very popular song called the Ho Boy, and the toy took on the form of the boy with a hoe, who once started, went up and down with his little hoe. Several Ho Boy toys have been found in New England. Third, help father build rope hoist to move the water wheel. 4. Father and Mr. Adams worked at putting the water wheel in place. Sarah did not come. 5th, tried the wheel. It was quite true and has great force. Father will begin fashioning the cog wheel. 6th, cut grass until rain started. First hay of the year. 7th, mowed. 8th, due. 9th, Sunday. Saw Sarah and she promised to visit me at mowing. 10th, rain. Sarah did not come. We'll use half the hay for bedding and half for the pit. It almost takes a detective to decide what Noah might have meant by using half the hay for the pit. This must have been the early version of the modern family silo, for believe it or not, the first silos were pits in the ground. The word silo cannot be found in the early American dictionary. It comes from the French, meaning a hole or pit. And in the beginning of our farm life, people stored cattle food in the ground instead of in those towering round buildings we are now so familiar with. As you travel across the countryside, you might notice how most of the old farm silos are leaning. The reason for this is that, unlike old barns that have big beam framework, the silo has no such skeleton. It is all skin and suffers from poor design. If the early farmers had designed them, they would probably have big beams and they would not lean. Noticing such things makes a detective of the historian and tells us how architecture changes from time to time. Silo, the building that is all skin and wants to lean. Noah's storage silo with a hole in the ground. Corn and hay. 11th, I am to do all the farm work. Father shall work full time on the mill. 12th, Mr. Beach is fitting the mill machinery while father frames the mill house. I have never been so tired from farm chores. For a young boy to have taken over the farm chores in mid-June certainly must have been a tiresome bit of work. But in those days, people did not farm to raise saleable crops. They farmed for their own table and for their own livestock. Noah and his father seldom saw each other except at mealtime, each one working so hard at his own chores. Rachel managed to hear the progress report then. "Goodness," remarked Rachel to her husband, "I don't see why your mill house must be so much better built than our own home. Why, those timbers you are using for framing are big enough to support a herd of elephants." "When the mill begins to operate," said Isaac, "you'll think there is a herd of elephants within the mill. I guess you've never been in a mill house." Rachel hadn't, or she wouldn't have known how a water wheel will make the whole mill structure shudder and weave with its tremendous power. Just as a modern man might enjoy the power and noise of a sports automobile or any mechanical device, the old-time miller derived great satisfaction from the enormous energy that turned the wheel and operated many tons of massive gears. It is the sort of job a man becomes wedded to. The drawing of house framing might appear technical and boring to the reader at first, but when you inspect it closely and see how the whole house frame went up without even one nail, each piece locking into another and holding itself fast, one can only marvel at the early craftsmanship. Nowadays people build merely to get the house up and to live in it or to sell it. Once people created buildings for themselves and their children's children. They enjoyed looking at the beams that made a castle of a farmhouse, withstanding the ages, and they derived the greatest pleasure from perfection of craftsmanship. Looking at the old-time workmanship, the modern builder will always remark, "You couldn't afford to do that today," or "They had all the time in the world then." Both statements are so untrue. We are richer now than ever, and as for having more time in the old days, the lack of mechanical time savers made the early Americans' workday about 3 times as long as our present day. 13th. Robert Adams came by, said his family are coming Saturday to see the new mill house. It is all framed. Sarah will be here on Saturday. 14th. Finished plowing and planting too. Help father make tidy around the mill. 15th. All the Adams arrived. Sarah and I took lunch upstream to see the beavers, and Sarah cut her foot in wading. I carried her all the way back. 16th. Sunday. Sarah not at meeting. Her foot bled. Here we might wonder if the cut on Sarah's foot reopened and so bled again, or if a doctor had bled her. For even in 1805, and indeed much later, the custom of bleeding was resorted to in almost every serious ailment. George Washington, whose death had occurred only 6 years before in 1799, probably died from his doctor's remedy of bleeding rather than from his ailment, which was only a sore throat. Isaac begins framing the mill house. Early houses often had no ridgepole but were lock-raftered. Wood pin, gate, sluice. Noah plows. Wood cogs. Fits the gear, Mr. Beach. Parts the plumping mill. Here are some of the geared drives used. Oak teeth, vertical shaft. Horizontal shaft. Direct drive for such work as trip hammer. Eccentric cam. 17th. Alarm of frost last night, but no thing was harmed. In spite of the coolness, I saw several hummingbirds and humblebees in the garden. Here again the author was puzzled by the wording in Noah's diary. Did Noah mean humblebees? Oddly enough, however, we find that none of the early dictionaries have any mention of bumblebee, but they all do list humblebee. The early Quakers were called the humble people because they refused to fight or kill. The humblebee was so called because it was thought that it too did not fight or sting. How the name finally became bumblebee is strange, except that it certainly looks more like bumble than humble. Plate, girt, flare from about 1 to 3 inches, exaggerated here. Corner post, floor, wedge tenon, front sill, end sill. Sills held together by weight of house, not by pegs. Cellar framework of a typical wooden farmhouse of 1800s. The cellar. Summer beam carried the joists for the first floor. Often logs round beneath and flat on top. Bark often left intact. Corner post mortise. Chimney. Front sill. Cellar chimney girts. 18th. Father still working at the mill. Mr. Beach stayed with us. 19th. The mill wheel has been set and there will be several diversions. Evidently this meant several machines harnessed to the same power. Father and Mr. Beach making use of the longest days of the year. Cogs will work both the hammer and the bellows, so some of my forge work shall be eliminated. It is all very wonderful. 20th. Rain stopped all work at the mill. I worked at farming. 21st. Due. 22nd. Went to see Sarah this night, bringing some wild honeysuckle. She was much better and might go to meeting tomorrow. 23rd. Sarah was at meeting. She wore a sprig of my honeysuckle, which had become very browned. The weather is warm and the days have become beautiful. Certainly the days are beautiful when your best girl remembers to wear a bit of your bouquet to her. But Noah's mind must have also been filled with the wonders of his father's new mill machinery. The magic of water power did so many things that before were drudgery, that adding some new device was as thrilling as our buying a new TV or washing machine for our home today. Some millers, so the records say, even attached a cord to the big wheel to rock the baby's cradle or to turn a spit in the fireplace and revolve the roast. 24th. Worked in the garden today and pruned in the orchard. Found many of the apple and pear trees with insects. 25th. Cleaned the chimneys at the forge barn and in the house and sooted about the trees. First dish of peas from the garden. 26th. Father and I sledded the oaks from the woodlot and put them down near the mill. It won't be long now, son, said Isaac, before we can saw these oak logs into flooring for the house, and with our own saw. You mean you will have the machinery set up before winter? Asked Noah. Millstones, conveyor lifted grain, pulleys, winch for lifting, up and down sawmill, trip hammer, bellows for the forge, mortar and pestle. An apprentice would tighten a rope turned once around the axle and pull operated a giant molding plane for rope harness. The water wheel could be rigged to do almost anything. Mr. Beach is in town working on the saw frame this very minute, but there's a lot of timber work to be cut in place before we can set up the sawmill. The thought of their own sawmill and logs being cut into fine new planks made Noah's work easier as he jacked the oaks up a skid and onto the sled. Sleds were used as much in summer as they were in winter at that time, for wheels were all but useless in heavy hauling across the old, unimproved trails. And Daniel, who was used to pulling a sled, knew just how to push his great weight against the sled first, to jounce it loose from the earth, and then begin the slow pull across the grass and soft mud. But Daniel was different today. He seemed slow and more attentive to Noah than he did to his work at logging. He nosed about Noah's clothes as if looking for salt, and he swung his head up and down quickly in the manner that he always did when Noah came to the barn first thing in the morning. "Come on, Daniel," said Noah. "It's not morning now. It's time for work. Put your back into it and heave-ho." Isaac was guiding the logs up and into the sled, using a long bar, but he couldn't help noticing there was something different about Daniel today. Lifting logs with a rope jack and ox power. Isaac, sled, Daniel, Noah. 27th. Thursday. This has been a poor day. Daniel is dead. When Noah had gone to the barn that morning, he noticed Bessie at the door. It had always been Daniel who came to greet him first. Bessie had called with her usual low moo the instant she saw Noah coming, but there was no sign of Daniel. When Noah reached the barn, he saw Daniel lying in the hay. His eyes were open, but they were not focused on anything. It was clear that Daniel was dead. Noah went inside and sat on the big body, which was still warm and soft. He must have been there for some time, and he must have remembered all the work and good times that he had lived through with Daniel. The big animal had become a part of the household, for he had helped to build it. He had helped to build the new bridge, even to pull the first logs for the old bridge. All the clearing and plowing was his work. After a long while, Noah felt the body beneath him growing stiff and cold. He rose slowly and opened the door to let Bessie out. But for the first time, the old cow stood still and refused to leave the barn. Noah walked toward the house as if he were dragging all the weight that Daniel had pulled over those fields. It would be difficult to break the news. 28th. We buried Daniel. Father says we shall have a horse. 29th. Mother laid out her flower garden today. I finished shooting the orchard trees. 30th. Sunday. I told Sarah about Daniel. We shall plant a fine tree over his grave. Along with the old diary, there were several papers folded and inserted within the leather cover. One was a recipe to destroy insects on fruit trees. It read, "Take 2 shovels full of soot, 1 of quicklime, mix together. Take some of this and put it windward of the tree, and sprinkle some water upon it, when a great quantity of gas will be evolved, which ascending into the tree will destroy insects, without injury to the plant, as it rather helps vegetable life." The reader might enjoy the fine use and rhythm of language in this simple direction, which was probably written by a plain farmer, without knowing who did the writing, but knowing that this is probably what Noah followed when he suited the orchard trees. We herewith reproduce the actual writing.